Hi, my name is Mattia Murray, and welcome to The Longer Road. You are on the longer road if you have multiple intersectional identities that are often marginalized. You've had to work harder to get to the starting line, and you might feel behind. I'm here to provide hope, support, and practical tips, and to let you know that you're not alone. Welcome. Today's topic is deciding how to decide. Yes, this is a little bit meta, but I myself have had a lot of challenges making small and large decisions, and it's also something I hear people talking about a lot in various forms. So I believe that having some framework for yourself of how you make decisions is actually enormously helpful. And today I'm just going to run through a few of the things that can make decisions difficult and some potential ways to address those. I think the biggest category here is essentially perfectionism, but even if you don't identify with that label specifically, it's just this idea that I'm going to make the wrong decision. So the fear that I will make a wrong decision, and that can cause us to spin and feel uncertain and just feel like there's nothing we can do right. If there is a right decision, and when we're looking at it, it doesn't seem possible for us to figure out which one that is, then it feels like the stakes are too high. And even in relatively small things, emotionally, this feels really bad, I think. And I'm going to use one hilariously small example for this, which is I used to have an enormous amount of anxiety about which pens to write with I was going to take out of the house when I was going out of the house for the whole day. And I write by hand a lot. And especially when I was using a paper planner, which I did for many, many years, where I had some form of notebook or journal or planner with me, where I was capturing important data. Color was how I helped organize some of that information. And so, for example, I would write my medical appointments in red. And so if I made an appointment and I didn't have a red pen with me, and if I forgot to go back and, circle that at some point, I was worried that I would miss it. So it's a very, very small choice which pens to take out of the house. But in my brain, here are one of the reasons why this could become very complicated very quickly, because also I didn't want to carry every color. That's just my example. But I had this very strong feeling that if I chose wrong, it was going to actually cause damage or harm at some point in the future. And I have missed a lot of medical appointments due to forgetting what day it was or whatever, so this is not an unfounded fear. And I actually go in two directions with this in my brain, but I use both of them. This is not an either or for me. On the one hand, I acknowledge and honor that part of myself that has that fear in whatever way you want to do that. So rather than just saying, oh, this fear is ridiculous, of course I'm not going to have my day be ruined because I have the wrong pens with me. I say, okay, what is it that I'm actually concerned about? Oh, it's that I might actually need a red pen later because I'm going to a medical appointment. I will be making another one. I want to make sure I have a red pen with me. And one thing that led to, in again, using that example in my own life, was that I had a few little kind of pre-made sets together of the pens that I was the most likely to need. So again, I know this is a very small example, but I knew I could just grab one of those off of my desk or out of my art supplies, and I would have the basics. So that made me feel a lot better. And then the other simultaneous direction that I go, while having, calmed myself down, honored that part of myself with the fear, and then looked at, is there actually a solution needed? The other direction I go with it is okay, is this really true? And is this a place where I can practice? I don't know if resilience is the right word in this case, but essentially calming and taking care of my nervous system in a deep way. So the previous direction that I go, where I'm honoring that part of myself that's afraid, it's not arguing with it. It's just saying, okay, I see that you're afraid, and just comforting it. This side is more, okay, I know logically this is not really true, that having the wrong pen is going to actually cause great damage somehow. When that fear comes up, I will then use it as a way to practice. I think practice is probably the best way to put it, because there's not just one emotion or one skill that I'm targeting here necessarily. It just depends on the situation. But in the pen example, it really is about anxiety and control. So one of the things I might be practicing there on my way out the door was trusting that everything was going to be okay and being able to just let go of some of that anxiety. So again, it's not either or. It's not completely just saying, oh, this is all in my head and I just need to, calm myself down. I did that after honoring my emotions, processing my emotions, and processing any particular potential actual decisions that needed to come out of that. And as a much bigger example of making the wrong choice or fear of making the wrong choice, I'm going to use the example of this retreat that I'm going on at the end of this year. So at the end of December into the beginning of January, I'm going to be going to a retreat trying a healing modality I've never used before. I'm very excited about it. It cost more than I've ever spent on a retreat, and I had to fly there. So total, it cost quite a bit more than I'm used to. And this also partly brings me to my next kind of big thing that I feel like can cause difficulty in decision making, which is fear of missing out or fear of future regret, really. Fear that not just that I'll miss the party, but that, I'll have missed a big opportunity that is going to be really life-changing. And when I was doing part of my own decision processing that I usually do, which for me includes some journaling, includes some thinking through what are the real barriers here, what are my concerns, I realized that price was the only factor, besides maybe logistical details, just because sometimes the logistical details of travel are really hard for me. But basically, price was the only factor and everything else looked amazing. I'd asked some questions of the person who was running the retreat. I knew it was going to be flexible if I needed accommodations. And we as humans are typically much more afraid of losing what we have than of not gaining something. So that fear of future regret is really interesting because it's actually not usually our primary driver. So I knew that my human brain bias was the fear of losing the money that I would be spending. And when I really thought about and processed what will happen if I don't go do this right now, if I wait and, do a different program another year, because I don't know if they're going to do this exact one again, I realized that it's not that I needed to do this or it would be terrible if I didn't, but that I was so excited about it in every other way that it really was a gift to myself that seemed like a pretty obvious choice. And the reason I'm using this example is because I made the decision that I absolutely wanted to do this about a month before I actually bought the ticket. And this brings me to my third sort of category or type of concern that can come up in decision making. And I actually don't have a great term for this, so whatever label you want to apply to this is totally fine. But it's basically this big bucket of fate, or is this thing supposed to happen, or am I being led to do this sense of purpose? And even if you don't have a particular spiritual leaning or, being that you're asking questions to, even if you're just thinking of your higher self or your future self, this idea that there may be some kind of path that you're on. And it is related to, is this the right choice or not? But to me, this is a little bit different because it's like, am I being called or asked or guided in a particular direction by, again, anyone? I don't really care what this is. Even if it's just your own intuition, for example, if your body or your intuition is pulling you towards something and you're saying no and pushing it away because of fear or something else, This is just another thing that comes up in decision making, I think, is this feeling of, okay, I know there's no right decision exactly, but I feel pulled, I feel drawn in this direction somehow, inexplicably sometimes. Sometimes our intuition is just pulling us in a direction. And so for myself, continuing the example of actually buying the ticket for the retreat, and it was non-refundable, so that was part of why I was really waiting until it felt like the right moment. I did several things to help me get there. One, I kind of asked for, I don't even really ask for signs per se, but I'll just say that that's what I did because that's close enough to how I was thinking about it. Just kind of, looking for information that would help me cue into my body feeling really, really good, basically. I also put out a couple calls in my social media and email letting people know that I wanted to do this thing, that it was expensive, and that if people wanted to give me any amount of donation toward it, I would, if they want me to, either whisper their name to a sloth because it's in a sloth sanctuary, or do a little heart magic for them on the mountain because it's also on a mountain. So I was like, this is fun. This is a way for me to kind of energetically exchange and also just kind of let people in on this fun thing I'm doing. And I knew that people were going to send me small amounts. I wasn't trying to fund the whole thing. It was actually more of a psychological support for me, or I don't know, feeling this community support. But it also helped assuage that part of my brain that was mostly just worried about the money. And then the final thing I did was I kind of kept coming back to the sales checkout page periodically and just kind of checked in with my body. Like, is this the right moment? And I just waited until it felt like it was. And there was no huge thing that happened. It was just a bunch of little things, including actually that someone I love and follow on social media was at the same retreat center. I don't know, a week before I actually went and bought the ticket. I saw that. I was like, oh, wow, that's so specific. Had some friends send me, $5 to $50 for this thing. Really amazing. And by the way, if you want to do that, I will put my Venmo and PayPal in the show notes. Again, it's really more about this energetic community feeling of support rather than the amount. So any amount is amazing and helps me feel like I'm bringing my community with me when I go do this healing journey, which is exciting for me. And then I think the final kind of big issue that comes up in decision making that I think of is when there's a problem that you actually can't see around or a way out of. So, for example, if I'd been looking at my finances and gone, you know what, there's just no fucking way, like this is just, there's no way I can do this, I would have either needed a totally different approach. It just would have felt very different because this is more about if you can see a creative solution and it feels possible, that's very, very different than the feeling that what you're trying to do is totally impossible. And I want to be sure to acknowledge that that's almost never just in our brains. I feel like there's all this talk about mindset in some of the communities I'm in that kind of makes it sound like all problems are fixable. And yes, in theory, however, they are not all individual problems are individually solvable, right? And they shouldn't be. One of the main things I care about is building community and being in community so we can really ask each other for what we need in a variety of ways, not just material resources, but really being able to collectively imagine and create a better world. And individuals don't do that alone, or at least that's a model that's not working as well anymore with what we're up against in the world. And one of the things I want to talk about when you're deciding how to decide is that when we are in survival mode, when we are in kind of this zoomed in, just trying to get through the day or just trying to get through the next hour when we don't know where rent is going to come from. So when we have these basic physical pressures, and even if your physical needs are largely met, but you have chronic pain or disability that make it really difficult to plan ahead or be able to follow through with things that you really, really want to do, what all of that does in our brain is it puts us into survival mode, and there's nothing wrong with that. We don't want to get out of it if we are using it to survive, but it puts a bit more stress on the system. It kind of zooms us in. The way I think about it is we're just looking, it's almost like we have blinders on and we're just looking at a small area right in front of us because that's what we need to do right now. We just need to get these basic needs met, get through this next little period of time, and then maybe we'll be able to look at other things on the other side. And I also wanted to add, this is also what burnout feels like, even if all of the external circumstances in your life seem okay, but you are burnt out and you're exhausted. It feels exactly the same as what I was just describing. And the direct antidote to that, if you want to be solving problems from a more zoomed out brain space that has access to your full problem solving capacity, that can think long term, that can do strategy, that's a different brain state. And there are things that can get us there. It's one of the main things I do in hypnosis. And I'm sure you can find YouTube videos that would walk you through kind of zooming out your brain state. I know people who use psychedelics for these purposes. I'm not suggesting that specifically, but that is a thing. For some people, even something like a runner's high or, getting those physical markers of your body having done a lot and giving you a bunch of endorphins. We can also get that from flow states. So even just doing an activity you really, really love and enjoy for an hour, hour and a half, really giving yourself that expansive space to get into another state of mind. And if you are used to not sleeping well, getting 1 or 2 really good nights of sleep can honestly feel like this. When my sleep is really off, I really start to notice it. And then as soon as I get 1 or 2 good nights of sleep, I'm like, oh shit. Other ways to expand or just get into a different brain state are cuddling, orgasms, things around people, these social things that help us feel expanded and open and loving. So this isn't about a single goal state. It's just about trying to zoom out that feeling of awe. So again, other things that might do this would be being in nature that gives you a sense of awe. So mountains, ocean, big, cool stuff, sunrises, sunsets. Again, just with that intention of zooming out, getting this bigger sense. Other people get this through giving and doing things for other people, but that they want to be doing. So like volunteering or being able to give someone something really meaningful to help someone in a meaningful way that feels special to both of you. All of these things, and there are more, right? I'm just kind of listing the ones that I use the most and that I know that other people use or that are very effective, but I'm sure there are more. Anything that helps you get into a different brain state that's zoomed out, that can see more possibilities, that has this problem-solving capacity, it just feels very different. And so my number one recommendation for deciding how you want to decide is deciding what kind of brain state or general state you want to be in to make a decision. And maybe you experiment with this or try different things, see what works for you. But I recommend starting small. So starting with really small decisions that really don't matter that much. And what I suggest working toward is not a single way of making decisions for the rest of your life, because we change and sometimes we do something for a while and then it just, isn't doing the same thing anymore. Rather, it's to come up with something for now that's good enough for now for you to be able to keep applying it and then to be able to set the decision down. So the real goal here is not to make the perfect decision. It's to feel good enough after you make the decision and to be able to support yourself and have your own back and be kind and loving to yourself, even if it turns out it wasn't the perfect decision. Because, I'm going to use one more big example, which was buying a house a little over a year ago. Yes, that sounds like a purely good thing. And obviously it is mostly just great and benefits and all this stuff, right? But You also know from anywhere that you've lived, nowhere is perfect, right? There's always going to be some issues. And something that I've been able to do with the decision is to really balance those things on the back end. So after having made the decision, it's too late. We bought the place. There's nothing that I can do to change the decision. It was very, very big. And if we had actually bought the first place that we had an offer accepted on that ended up falling through in the inspection process, I think we'd be regretting it very heavily because that place needed a lot of work. And I'm able now to look at the huge pile of benefits and great things about where we're living and great things about the house with, the small handful of things that are not perfect, because no place is perfect, no house is perfect, no neighborhood is perfect. And I have so much gratitude about the good things that I just completely am able to, in a certain way, let go of and accept the big set of decisions that got me to this point. And again, not saying that you need to do any of those things in particular. For me, letting go and releasing has been a really important practice, but I'm also absolutely not suggesting that as a first step if, for example, you are dealing with trauma, right? When you're dealing with trauma, there's a whole other set of things you're going to want to do. Totally fine. So my last big idea here is, how do you create your own rubric for deciding how you're going to decide? And I encourage you to experiment with this from a variety of directions with the various things I've brought up. So if any of those difficulties around making decisions really resonated with you, like if you feel really strongly that you worry about making the right decision, or if you know that you actually make decisions pretty easily, but you just have a lot of structural barriers around it that make it actually difficult, right? Those are different ways of approaching it. The reason to come up with some kind of structure in which you make decisions is just so that you can have an endpoint. And if you don't need that, if you mostly don't have trouble making decisions and you just kind of do it and move on and don't care, this isn't really for you. And maybe I should have said that at the beginning. But we all make a lot of decisions. I think a lot of us experience decision fatigue, and I've talked about that before. And one way to reduce decision fatigue is to create a set of essentially rules around how you make a decision, or how you know a decision is complete, how a decision is made, and you're good to move on, and you can just, again, kind of leave this behind for now. I recommend experimenting with some of the following. And again, just whatever resonates with you, whatever sounds interesting to you, and whatever you think will work with your brain. Only you know which combination of things is going to work for you to even begin experimenting with. First is simply to answer the question, how will I know when the decision is made? Again, this is not necessarily when you've clicked the button to commit to the thing or purchase the thing or whatever. How do you know when the decision is made internally? When you're just like, yes, this is it. Does your body give you any signals when you are sure about something? If it does, that's a great place to start. Because in that case, really what you're looking for is then just a set of practices around that help you get to that point where deep in your gut, or however you experience it, when you just know that this is it. And if that's not something you experience, or if that just doesn't sound accessible to you, then I suggest deciding what the end point is of a decision. I know this is very meta, but if you tend to struggle with decision making, just figuring out or deciding what the end point is when you're just done processing, when you're done researching, you're just going to say that the decision is made. Knowing what that looks like for you can be very powerful, and it can reduce decision fatigue. So again, even if individual decisions look different, maybe you're going into a really small decision and you've decided that for a certain level of decision, you give yourself a certain amount of time to process it or to think through it. And that can be any length of time. Again, this is totally up to you, but that's just, again, one way to think about constraining when do I consider this decision to be complete? So that could be about how it feels. That could be about how long it takes. It could be about it fitting into some larger structure of values or goals that you have, for example, which I didn't go into at all. But, if you've already done a good amount of work around figuring out any of those things, if you have any big goals, or if you have values that you align with, for example, maybe that's one way you make decisions. One really lovely tool to use that I've seen in multiple contexts, in multiple communities I'm in, is to create your own compass. There's the term moral compass, and it's kind of that, but it's values or things you care about, things that are important to you. And I've seen this in different ways. One is just sort of using the visual of the compass and some words that you like. Another that I got from Simone Soul is kind of using the opposite points of the compass, so either 4 or 8 total, and having the opposite ones be both values that are important to you, but that you feel balance each other in some way. So it's not a positive and a negative. They're both things that you care about, but they're things that, for example, authenticity might balance self-focus or alone time. So again, neither of those are positive or negative per se. They're just different and they balance each other. So that's an exercise I found useful as well. And I made a compass like that with her, and I still refer to that when I'm making decisions. And then once you've decided what a finished decision looks like, how you know when the decision is made, then it's just about playing with all of these factors, any tools at your disposal, including just asking yourself the question repeatedly before you go to sleep and letting your subconscious take care of it. Or, if you have time and spaciousness around a decision, this does not need to be a super consciously oriented process. It can be, and some people enjoy that and they want to engage with it in that way. But it also definitely can be something where you just give your creative brain some space, go about your day, and just let your brain process. And again, if you're going that direction, there's all kinds of things you can do, like drawing or free writing or anything that kind of helps you just get that information out of your unconscious without necessarily the same kind of active logical processing. And then my really for real final point is, how can you make this more fun? How can you let this be fun? Because again, if you're used to decisions being a big deal and having a lot of emotional weight, it's almost the opposite of that to have it be play, because part of the definition of play is that it does not have an end point or an end goal, which I think is very interesting applied to decision making, which potentially does have an end goal. But how can you let the entire process be more fun, more interesting, align more with how your brain works? And then over time, if you find elements of that really work for you, it may become a bit of a system that you use repeatedly so that you know, when I'm approaching a decision, this is how I approach it. This is how I know I'm done when the decision's done. And here are all the little tools I like to play with in the meantime to enjoy the process more. And one of the benefits that will come out of this, if you do anything along these lines, is you will start to make decisions easier and faster on the one hand, but sometimes you'll end up giving yourself this huge, spacious amount of time to make a decision, but it won't feel the same as just putting the decision off and having it feel like a stressor in the back of your mind. It'll actually just feel like, oh, I'm just letting my unconscious play with this and do what it wants to do, and I know I'll have the decision by the time I need it. And that alone has probably gotten rid of, 20 to 30% of my own anxiety, because so much of my anxiety was around decision making before. So have fun with this. Let me know if you ended up applying any of these things, because I love this nerdy meta stuff. And I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening. If you know someone who would be helped by this podcast, please share it with them. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions at mattia@mattiamarae.com. That's MATTIA at MATTIAMAUREE.com. Thank you.